Have you told your friends that you see ghosts?
Oh, absolutely not.
Gina Rodriguez returns in Not Dead Yet.
I'm back, baby!
Who is up?
Oh, she's the obituary writer.
And Brad Garrett joins the brilliant ensemble cast.
Titan, Maverick, Titan of all Mavericks. These are all words used to describe me.
Not Dead Yet. Season premiere. Tonight, 8:30, 7:30 Central on ABC. And stream on Hulu.
Hey guys, so this is going to probably be the last ever retroactive episode that we do. So I was thinking about this the other day. So I really wanted us to put out this episode. This episode is not anything like a horror movie night episode. And I want to tell you guys that up front. So the way that Scott and I met was years ago. I was doing a show on Reddit called the Reddit Horror Club with my friend Miguel. And it was
Let's rewind. It started on our horror. Somebody said we should have a weekly discussion on one movie, or like we should have discussion posts on one movie. And somebody said, "Oh, okay, I'll make a specific subreddit for it." And they made it Reddit Horror Club. And then you and Miguel got to be mods, right?
Oh, Miguel never even used Reddit. I was like, I want to do this, but I need someone to talk. Like, I was like, I'm not going to sit here and talk about the movie if
without
the guest doesn't jump on. Yeah. So I tapped him because I had just moved back from LA and I had become really good friends with Miguel. And so for the first maybe like 40 episodes, it's Miguel and I. And Miguel's a great dude. Very smart, knows his like history of horror like no one's business, encyclopedic knowledge. So the show is a much more serious discussion show. We would laugh every once in a while, but it was very serious. Yeah. And we would always invite whoever picked the movie to come on. And episode 10 was Scott. He picked Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
Which is a movie that we've never picked it for horror movie night.
Yeah, it's a very special movie for us. So people had asked that people had emailed us about it and everything. So I always knew that I wanted to put out this episode one day. And I figured since we're taking this July hiatus, which I don't know, we'll see how it goes. This might become like a regular thing for just because our lives get so busy in the summer that July we take like a 3-week. Here's some like live episodes and extra shit that we've had buried around. But I felt like with Brian on the show, it further severs the tie of horror movie night with Reddit Horror Club. So I feel like there's less and less reason for us to go to that well. And, you know, we're also cutting ourselves off sometimes from like a lot of movies that would make great horror movie night episodes. So, I mean, obviously we'll still occasionally mention it, but at this point, this is us closing the chapter on Reddit Horror Club as far as the history of horror movie night a little bit. But I thought that the listeners would find it really interesting just to hear the very first time that Scott and I ever spoke to each other. This led to, you know, maybe a year later, me asking Scott to become the new co-host when Miguel couldn't do it anymore. Led to, you know, hanging out and meeting each other like 3 or 4 times. By the time this comes out, I've already been to Scott's house for the first time. Like it's crazy to think that this 45-minute introduction really changed the course of both of our lives. So
not to make it too heavy, but yeah.
I mean, I'm Scott and I have very different theological beliefs, but I'm a very firm believer that certain people enter your life for certain reasons and they kind of help guide the course of your life. And I think that Scott is definitely a big one for me. You know, like I don't think horror movie night would be a thing if not for Scott. So enjoy this. I don't think that you guys are going to, you know, write to us about how this was the funniest thing you've ever heard, because it's not. But I think that it's an interesting social experiment, and scattered around this will be a bunch of like bonus episodes from people I'm interviewing at San Diego Comic-Con right now. So, you know, you're getting content, you're getting stuff, you'll get laughs. I'm hanging out with Jonathan. There's no way that I'm not going to record something with Jonathan that will be filled with laughs. So stay tuned. But you got anything else you want to add there, Scott?
No, aside from I'm sorry for the first time I ever hogged the mic.
with yet another episode. Today's movie was picked by Ichabod Guitar, aka Scott, who's actually sitting in with Miguel and I right now.
Hey guys.
And the movie you picked was Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. Can you tell us why you picked this movie?
It is easily my favorite horror movie of the last decade. I've always had a thing for, horror movies in particular that are very tongue-in-cheek and, aware of themselves. And I also like mockumentaries. I like documentaries too, but it just kind of it hit a lot of points for me. And I thought it was hilarious. I thought that it was a great idea. It was a pretty good plot, as well as I think that the writing was good. But I don't know if we want to get into that yet. But I think that a lot of that was improv too. So very good actors.
Now I'm pretty sure Miguel and I are on the same page when we both say that we 100% agree that this is one of the best horror movies of the last decade.
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, I just want to throw it out there that I posted on Twitter that I was watching this to prepare for this podcast, and the Behind the Mask fans just come out of the woodwork. So many people love this film, and it was a brilliant pick. It's a great film.
Well, I'm glad that I'm in like-minded company, because any opportunity that I can find to just extol the virtues of this film, I will.
Now, this wasn't a very heavily publicized or well-known movie at all. This was kind of something that horror fans had to find for themselves, I think. So I'm kind of curious how each one of us first saw this movie, because I know that this was none of our first time seeing this.
Right.
So, Scott, how did you first discover Behind the Mask?
It's one of those totally romantic times when, you go in to the Best Buy or whatever, and you're like, man, I could really go for something, but you have no idea what you're looking for. And I just picked it out of the blue and fell in love with it. So that was how we first met.
That's pretty sweet. That's a sweet story.
Very romantic.
Miguel, what's your story?
Very similar, actually. I was looking for new movies to watch, and it was one of those, you know what, I'll give it a chance. And one of those rare moments where it was you're surprised by how great the pick was.
For me, I was working at a video store, and our magazine came in once a month with hey, here's some movies that are coming out in the next couple weeks that you may want to order for your store. And I saw the ad for it, and I basically had to beg my boss to order a copy of it. I was like, I am promising you that this will rent. And he's like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, please, just get it. So he got 2 copies of it. And thank God when you work at a video store, you get the perk of watching the movies a week before you put them on the shelf. Right. Because those movies were never in stock. They were rented so frequently. A part of it had to do with the fact that every employee at that store loved that movie and would just recommend it to any horror fan that came in. You're like, oh, you got to see it. You got to see it. It's a masterpiece. You had mentioned, Scott, that you like mockumentaries and documentaries, and the film is definitely a mockumentary. But what I like about it is that it just hits that random point where it just stops being a mockumentary mid-movie.
Oh, that. When I was first watching it, I was just totally captivated, and I was just like, oh my God. Because, I was about 10 minutes in, and I was already, I had made up my mind that this movie was amazing. And I remember the first time watching it, and when it goes from, there are points where it's, it goes from the handheld to 35 millimeter or whatever, it goes from the mockumentary to the traditional
library scene specifically.
The library scene happens, like you said, about half an hour in. And that's just cool because it's like a cut scene almost in a video game or something. But it was just, I liked that, but it didn't really strike me because you're kind of just going along with the movie at first and just letting things happen. And then when they're, about I'd say, like almost an hour in, and it goes to where they say shut off the cameras, and she's, and Taylor, the survivor girl, is like, this is happening, and that was such a cool moment. I just think that it speaks volumes to how well thought out the whole movie was. I mean, the guy that wrote it, I was a sociology major in college, and I wrote my my capstone project, like a senior thesis, about comic books and masculinity. And I imagine this guy probably wrote his about imagery in horror movies if he had something similar, because that's exactly what it felt like, was somebody who had done tons of research and who had just, discussed ad nauseum to probably all of his friends and family, like the ins and outs of horror movies and all these just amazing sub layers to the whole culture. And it was just it was just such a cool movie in general, because it's like, it's, a couple feet above in the meta realm talking so much of that movie. And then it dumps you for the last half hour or so into a regular slasher flick, but it's giving you all these pieces, all this fresh insight, and then it puts you right in the movie. I just thought that it works so well.
Well, yep. What I loved about this movie, and it's little things that I picked up, but I know that we've talked about it before. When you watch a horror movie, and you can tell which ones are made by true horror fans and which ones are just made for a guy going for a paycheck. And there's a line in this movie, and there's a lot of great moments where you go, this guy knows his horror movies. But the line specifically is when she's talking about Michael Myers, and she says, who's terrorized this town 4 different times, because he actually was smart enough to, like, most people who don't know horror movies be like, 8 times because there's been 8 movies. No, right. Halloween 1 and 2 take place on the same night. 4 and 5 take place on the same night.
Yeah,
H2O and Resurrection are like the same night roughly. Like it was such a well thought out script.
I'm sorry, I have to pause you for a second. 4 and 5 don't happen in the same night. They're 1 year separate.
Shit.
I'm only going to cut you off there because Halloween 4 and 5 are my favorite in the series, because I think Danielle Harris is amazing.
Okay. I am going to admit that I am not a big Halloween fan. My favorite Halloween movie is Halloween 3. So,
really? That's interesting. You're the first person that I've ever talked to that said the 3. I mean, I like 3 because I like John Carpenter, but it's not really part of the canon. So,
Halloween 3, ironically, I do have to mention, Halloween 3 is the movie that is the reason why this club exists in the first place.
Halloween 3, with the exception of part 1, is my favorite of them all.
Yeah,
by far. Yeah.
Because Scott, do you remember what I'm talking about?
No, I remember the thread, but I don't remember the comment that started it.
Someone had started a thread of what's the worst horror movie you've ever seen.
Oh, that's right.
And their movie was Halloween 3. And there was like such an outrage on the boards of like, that's the worst horror movie you've ever seen. And it turned into a giant, like, we need to educate people on horror movies. And then that's when someone was just like, why not have a movie club?
Yeah.
So it's all
Perfect,
Halloween 3.
Right there.
Yeah, Halloween 3 is what started this entire thing.
So cool.
But yeah, the idea of creating this world where all these serial killers exist still also makes sense, because we have a film like Freddy vs. Jason that already kind of put that groundwork in there, that there's this universe where all these characters exist. So why not? Why wouldn't there be someone who wants to rise to the occasion as the next big guy?
Oh, and that brings up a great point. I think that the world building that they did in the script is just perfect, because it's little comments like the one that brought us to this part of the conversation that are just they're little jabs that could go unnoticed if you're not educated already a little bit about the horror genre itself. But there are things like, where they talk about Freddy and Jason and Michael Myers as if they know them, especially when Eugene is talking. A lot of the stuff Eugene says really does a lot of the world building and brings it down to real life, and it makes it feel like all these characters that are based on archetypes and are based on these collective fears that we have are actually real people, and like the Halloween series are more or less, dramatizations of real life, terror. And I just think that that's another telling piece to how well this movie was put together.
Well, and I love that he doesn't refer to them by their character names. He refers to them as like Fred and Mike and Jay, as if he's friends that he just had over one day.
Yeah.
I would go as far as to say that this is. What I wrote down was best satire on the slasher film since Scream, possibly better than.
I've tried to explain it to people in a similar vein as Scream, because Scream was such a well-known movie, and I'm not. The next thing I'm going to say, I'm not dissing on Scream at all. I love Scream. I watched Scream hundreds of times in high school. I mean, I love that movie, but I gotta say that this movie blows that movie out of the water.
Yeah.
Scream was still a blockbuster. It had stars in its eyes.
Yeah.
I mean, it had a big cast, it had a big production, and a big advertising budget.
And Scream is also, it's hard to use that as an example, because I think for a certain age group, I would say maybe like the 20, maybe like 28 and younger, that was a lot of people's introduction to horror films again, because it was...
Yeah, see, for me, I hate Scream. I think it's awful.
Oh, really?
I really don't like that film. And part of the reason, especially now, like at first I was like, take it or leave it. But in light of films that did it better, like Leslie Vernon, it's hard not to make the comparison. I know you didn't want to. But the fact of the matter is, it's kind of a meta look at what had happened to the horror genre after the early 80s, when we were introduced to the slasher subgenre, which essentially took over and changed everything. And Scream was kind of an outside look at that. Scream, for me, when it came out, I had already well past graduated high school and was well versed in these films by that time. And I just didn't think it did a very good job. First of all, its relation of the rules of the horror genre or slasher genre was a little too explicit for me. It was just what's his name, relating.
Jamie Kennedy,
Jamie Kennedy, who I also despise, standing up there relating these rules. Man. Yeah, it's just it's not an intelligent film.
You sound like were you the guy that when that movie came out, you're like, I already saw this in Student Bodies?
Actually, no, I wasn't actually. But when it was being advertised, the slasher genre had been dead for a while, and it was being extolled as a return to form, and rather than being that, it was like. It was like Wes Craven. We'll say Wes Craven since he was had a lot to do with it, obviously, and his buddy Kevin Williamson, whose other credits included Dawson's Creek, wanted to kind of tell the world, we made movies like I made movies like Nightmare on Elm Street, but I've grown up now, and we're just gonna kind of MST3K what we did. The humor parts overrode the horror parts in Scream.
I'll tell people any day that I think Scream is a comedy first and a horror second. Oh, yeah. It's impossible to talk about Leslie Vernon without bringing up Scream, Man Bites Dog, and more recently, Cabin in the Woods. I think Cabin in the Woods
Man Bites Dog is genius, and Cabin in the Woods was also really good. And Cabin in the Woods did what Leslie Vernon did very well, which was when you saw the mechanics behind everything. In other words, in Leslie Vernon, it was the mockumentary parts. Things were very kind of lighthearted, and people are just, Leslie even called it work related. He called it his work. And it was very much like he was really good at it, but it was almost like an office job for him, the same way that in Cabin in the Woods, it was like an office job for those guys. Yet when it was time to, for him to act on it or perform, it switched over to actually being a horror movie. It did it a couple of times in Leslie Vernon. The first time, I believe, was when the waitress they pulled the brick out of the way and the door slammed. That was very brief. It was like 2 seconds. And then they did it again during the library. It was a little bit longer. So every time the horror parts are getting a little bit longer as you get farther along in Leslie's preparation. And then, of course, as you said, in Act 3, it completely switched over. They turned off the mockumentary cameras. At that time, we are seeing her crew for the first time. We're finally seeing the faces of the cameraman and the mic operator for the first time in that third act. They're now characters in their own mockumentary. So it's done really, really well. And Cabin in the Woods did that well, but I would say that that Behind the Mask did it first, obviously, and did it just as well.
I actually get mad when people compare it to Man Bites Dog. In a sense, because it's like, okay, camera crew follows serial killer, check. But then from that point, it is a very different film. I feel like Man Bites Dog is so much more of a psychological, like, how would that affect another human being to actively be participating in this thing versus, Leslie Vernon that is at its sense still very lighthearted and humorous. And I think that's a big thing, is that the humor keeps the movie going.
Well, it also, you don't expect what happens at the end, and it makes you really conflicted when it gets to the end, because Leslie Vernon is a very charming person.
Oh, he should have won an Oscar.
Yeah, I
even he's gotten more work out of it. I remember after the movie came out, I found his Twitter or blog or whatever it was.
Yeah, Nathan Bissell. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was like struggling to make ends meet, to provide for his family and stuff. And I haven't looked at his IMDb lately or anything, but I mean, he deserves way more accolades for this.
I got depressed because Miguel, you had just recently tagged him on Facebook,
right?
And I was like, he only has 140 followers.
Yeah,
like it was just like one of those things where I'm like, how is it possible that I have more Twitter followers than this guy when he is?
Well,
he is a phenomenal actor.
Partly my intention of tagging Nathan in that tweet.
Try to get him on here?
No, actually, although that would have been nice. But no, the real reason was to try and get him more followers.
Yeah.
That's the best way, by the way, to get people Twitter followers, as an aside.
Hey, I
follow Friday's crap. But
when you did that and I was like, oh, he has a Twitter? I'll follow him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he is absolutely phenomenal. As Leslie, and partly it's because he plays both sides of his character so well. When he becomes vicious, he's pretty damn vicious, but other than that, he seems like the most harmless person in the world, using words like poop and
it's great because I wrote down a bunch of the quotes and I wanted to bring that up anyway, where a lot of that like quasi-sexual tension with Taylor, who, by the way, is the little girl from My Girl, if nobody put that together.
I did not. That's amazing.
It's just a strange change for her, I think. Any case, so he talks about, he's very sweet with her because he's kind of got this archetypal love for her because she's the survivor girl and she's the pristine virgin that he needs to have for his story, and he needs her to defeat him, and that he orchestrates it. And it's a great little denouement when they explain later on that when she has the epiphany that he picked her. But it's great because he says things about scare the poop out of the next kid that goes in there, or where he says as yonic imagery, and she's like, "What's that?" And he's like, "It's the opposite of phallic, lady bits or lady bits, whatever." I mean, he's very sexually stunted, which is a really amazing sublayer to slasher films if you think about it. Because I mean, I don't want to go too far off onto this, but just as the tangent goes, I mean, Jason was a physically and, if I read it right, mentally handicapped child who died and became a monster. Freddy is a
child molester, and yeah,
and
you're right. It's taps in. They're all kind of like not. None of them have a normal sexuality, or mostly asexual.
exactly.
Well, it's always been an important point because one of the things that has always been leveled at the slasher genre is its bizarre morality. In other words,
sex equals death.
Exactly.
You say you don't like the movie Scream. Come on.
No, well, see, Scream was not intelligent, and especially in light of the fact that Wes Craven had made it, and he had made intelligent movies in the past, and Scream marked his descent into bullshit like My Soul to Take. So,
Okay, wait. I gotta pause here. You're saying that Scream was when he started going downhill. Did you ever see Shocker?
Which is a fucking awesome movie.
It's awesome because it's terrible.
Yeah, but it's great.
Right, but the same reason why you like Shocker is the reason why someone like me likes Scream, because it's cheeseball.
No, Shocker played it straight. It was a really cheesy movie, but it was played straight. Scream was very wink, wink, nudge, nudge at the audience. And if there's anything I despise...
It's two sides to the same mirror, I'd say. It's still kind of elbowing the audience, but one is overt and sort of meta, and the other one is saying, we're expecting you to get that this is supposed to be a little cheesy.
I just want to say that I think Serpent and the Rainbow is his worst movie. That movie's boring as shit.
That movie's awesome.
I don't remember anything from that movie.
So bored by that movie.
School.
The movie, Behind the Mask is also kind of fun because it's such a slasher film reunion show.
Yeah.
You've got Kane Hodder, and you've got, Robert Englund's in there, and the old lady from Poltergeist is in there. And
Zelda Rubinstein.
Yeah, her last movie.
Oh, I had a question for you guys about that. I've watched that scene over and over in the library. When Kelly screams and the old lady, the librarian, falls over, is it that she fainted, or is Leslie pulling the side out of her back?
I think it's that she fainted. I think Leslie was not in my... But I need to rewatch it now that you're asking, because that's a really good question. But
I just felt like it would have made more sense.
He had planned on killing her, but he ended up being distracted by Robert Englund, and it was good enough that he had gotten an Ahab that he didn't have to kill her at that point.
Well, I think that actually, I think that the thing is that on one side, if he had killed her, it makes Kelly more scared. But, right. I mean, the context clues seem to me that he wasn't even there to kill the librarian, although it's a discussion that he has with Eugene and Jamie in the scene before that. Because Jamie says, she spends a lot of time at the library, maybe you should knock off the librarian.
Right.
So,
that was his plan, but I think the appearance of Robert Englund changed everything at that point.
Okay.
Well, and I would argue that Taylor would have stopped the documentary sooner had he killed somebody.
I'm going to agree with Matt there, because as soon as, and that's a really important part later on too, as soon as someone finally dies, which in my understanding was always in the bedroom later on, right before it switches from mockumentary to actual horror film, they just hear it. They just hear the sounds coming from the room.
Which is an awesome... I thought that was just great that the first actual kill of the movie, first kills of the movie, are off camera, and it's just... It seems so visceral that it's just the audio... Like the audio of someone dying.
Yeah.
Because it hit me because it was one sense instead of all of them.
Well, and I like that you also have... a lot of the comedy tends to die down once it turns into the horror movie, but the reveal that Kelly is not a virgin is such a great reveal.
Yes.
And
then he's flipping around or spinning around her head is just really the icing on the cake to that.
Well, and just like the best lines once it stops being a documentary come from the camera crew, who just doesn't want to be there. and just wants nothing to do with what's happening anymore, but they just keep going along with it, and it does hit that kind of meta thing where they're trying to explain to people that they are characters in a horror movie right now, and they just don't get it.
And they're convinced to go because of a threat to their masculinity as well.
Oh yeah, she's like, if they say something, she's like, oh, well, if you can't find your balls or something like that, and then
Like,
the one guy's like, she had to go with the balls or something.
Yep, exactly.
I did want to make a comment about the best line of the movie, and I know that they use it. I've seen it in at least one of the trailers, but it's the part where Leslie is trying to keep Taylor and the crew there, and because they hear the first kills, and then he goes, "Okay, everybody outside." He's got them by their van, and he says, "I made a choice. I made a choice to provide a counterbalance to all those things that we hold good and pure." And there's that long pause, and he goes, "You chose journalism, okay?" It's just such a great. The jokes are just spot on. I just think that this movie kicks ass in every possible way.
Well, I want to hop into our favorite scenes from from the movie, and my favorite scene actually is more so a quote than anything else, but it's the whole sequence where Leslie's talking about the amount of training that goes into doing it, and he says something like, they're running their asses off, and I gotta look like I'm just walking.
Yeah,
yeah. Have you guys watched it on Netflix then, right?
Well, I own it.
Okay, I own it too. Miguel, have you seen the deleted scenes?
I've seen a few of them. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, and I don't know if anybody listening has missed them, but there's one where Leslie bets Taylor that he can catch her between these two trees in the orchard, and it shows the part how he runs real fast, and then when she turns around, he's like, oh, he stops and he's walking like a zombie, and then as soon as she turns around, he starts running again, and then she trips, and then he hits the tree, and he goes, pay up, and they're like, oh, that's cheating. That's another great little piece to that scene. I kind of wish they would have kept it in the movie, but that is an amazing scene because it's that, I like I said, world building where they are so cool and succinct with the way that they kind of just explain away the unbelievable pieces of movies like Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Miguel, your favorite scene?
My favorite scene in the film, I think it is near the right before it turns into an actual horror film, where they're really going over exactly what's going to happen at the house and the area and stuff. And there's a scene where Leslie and the documentarian are standing right now, or sitting actually, I think, across from each other, and it's all coming together really well. And he had thought of everything, and she says something like, "This sounds like a really brilliant plan." And Leslie Vernon looks down and very quietly says, "Thank you." and it's so. The way he says it is so full of pride. Like, he's so happy with how he's thought of everything, but he's also very humble the way he says that. It's just so beautiful and perfect.
There's a in that same sequence when he's walking around the house, I also love the line where she's like, "Well, can't they just throw something through the window?" And he just goes, "Never comes up."
Right. He's like, you'd think they would, wouldn't they? But the only time they do is when they're 2 floors up.
Yeah, and it's just so cool how basically I feel like the writer / director watched all of his favorite horror movies and just wrote down all the tropes that the kids that get slaughtered did and was like, okay, I can have my character make fun of all these stupid things as well as account for them. And it's just, I mean, they do something similar in Cabin in the Woods, in a very different way where, they say, oh, put the gas on them, and then the jock is like, oh, we should split up.
Yeah.
So,
Scott, what was your favorite part in the movie?
It's fun. I have 2, and I'll be quick about them both. But Miguel, I could have sworn that you were going to mention the first one of them, which is where Leslie's telling what's going to happen. He's saying, okay, this thing's going to happen, and then these kids are going to go to this part, and he says that the one cheerleader and her jock boyfriend are going to go down to the basement. And
I know where you're going with this.
The boobs, and Taylor goes, "Leslie, isn't that a bit gratuitous?" Or something like that, And it's awesome because there's so many layers to that. It's just like how there's got to be a tit shot in every good slasher film, and it's great because it's Taylor being a prude, and it's Leslie kind of poking fun because he knows that she's a virgin, and it's just it plays on so many levels, and it just works on every single one of them.
Yeah, it's great because his sexuality, as you said before, is so juvenile.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Hey, I'm the one telling the story here."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just so much fun. And the other really great part is actually when I had it written down. It's when they go to the high school early on, and they're sitting in the van, and he's going, okay, you got to have your survivor girl, blah blah blah, and he points to the one girl, and they say, oh, are you going to go after her? He's like, oh, no, I've had somebody picked out for a while. I mean, if I was starting this late in the game, I'd be screwed. But then he goes on and says, but you need to pad your numbers. Or he says, you have to have more people. And he points at the jocks and cheerleaders and goes, there, that's your bread and butter. Young, sexually virile or whatever, and then he goes, they're great. They're your bread and butter. And then he points to the hipsters who are, skinny guys with their little, their hats, and they're smoking a cigarette around the side of the school. And he goes, look at that guy. And he's like, oh, those are the ones you do late in the game. You pad your numbers with them because they're like an easy kill. And that's my other favorite line, other favorite scene, because it's just, it's funny because, I mean, funny like in an interesting way. It intrigued me when I first watched it because he doesn't really see them as like, oh, I'm going to murder them. I have to have he's saying, okay, those are how to up your score, more or less.
Right. Well, it's like you said, it's work related. Everything's very like
mathematically figured out.
It's his job, yeah. And it's also great that the way he's portrayed, he's very much like an actor in a way. If you ever hear an actor talk about their work and the way they prepare for a role, it sounds a lot like how Leslie Vernon is preparing for his kills. And then when it finally shows the actual murder parts, it's shot completely differently, as you said, and that's like his performance. You actually get to see the play at that part.
This is kind of unrelated, but this is probably the only episode we'll ever get to discuss this. Miguel, were you the one that on Geekscape told us your idea for the Ultimate Friday the 13th remake?
That was me, and I knew that was going to come up. And I do want to say I have had that idea since before I saw this movie. And I will note also, because I know you're going to say the idea and I'll let you say it, but I'll note also that you never actually see him doing what I want to see done. So go ahead.
Miguel had an idea when he appeared on the Geekscape podcast with my friend Jonathan and I. And his idea was that you need to remake Friday the 13th, but after each kill, linger around long enough to see Jason setting everything up, so that like almost as if he's an interior designer. Like, okay, so the blood's gonna drop here, and she's gonna look up. And then,
yeah, then I actually want to see it. Like, there's parts in Friday the 13th where they'll open a closet and the body will be like strung up, looking down at them. And like, I want to see him like grabbing some rope and tying it up and hoisting it up and the whole 9 yards.
Adjusting the head so it's just the right angle.
Yeah, exactly.
It's such a phenomenal idea.
I think it's great. I feel like it's happened in some movie where you saw something obviously not that intricate and such a comment on, the fact that they have these perfectly orchestrated views of a dead body. But I feel like, I hope somebody in the comments of this discussion can, bring something to light about that, because, I've seen tons of movies and I feel like if somebody's like, oh, that's in that movie, I'll smack my forehead and go, okay, that's what it was.
Because it's just such a... I remember you telling me that, Miguel, and then I watched Friday the 13th again. And you're right, it's like the last 5 minutes is this perfectly orchestrated, every door she goes to is something else.
Yeah, it's like a fun house.
So I think we can all agree that we love this movie. I think that's what we've concluded from this half hour of talking is that
Yes.
we are fans.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's pretty
Behind
good.
the mask. Yeah, it's all right.
I would definitely say I don't know if it's the best horror movie of the decade, but it is certainly in like the top 3.
Yeah, and of course we should mention that they've been trying to fundraise to get the sequel made for a long time.
And I should
They
talk
make a sequel to this movie?
They want. Yes, they very much want to.
Wow, that's amazing.
Actually, I
With
should
the
talk,
full cast and everybody.
I should talk
that'd
to Jonathan because Jonathan's friends with the writer and director.
Wow.
So he might be able to tell us a little bit more about that. So if I can find out information on the sequel,
Well, I can find. I'll post the link for it. I've done some
digging
PR for them in the past. So
nice. Let's do plugs. Scott, do you got anything you need to plug?
For Horror Club?
Or just in general? A podcast you might do, a band that you're in, whatever.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have a band.
Okay.
We're a metal band, and we're called Ichabod Crane, which makes a lot of sense when you see my handle is.
Do you play the
Ichabod
guitar in the band, perchance?
I'm the vocalist, yeah. We just finished tracking a cover EP, and so it's very non-metal covers. We do a cover of Blondie, Call Me, and things like that. I was really close to talking the guys into doing a cover of. It's only from movies and TV shows. That's the whole point of it. And I really wanted to get the guys to do a cover of Party Time by 45 Grave. From
Return of the Living Dead,
which we'll be talking about next week.
That's right.
It's going to be another great conversation because I can't wait to talk about the blurred out zombie boobs.
You told me that too. And when we were talking in private messages, you're like, I'm really excited to talk about this when we start discussing the movie.
It's so perverse because it's like you can see people's, heads being chewed open, but you can't see CG, or you can't see like a puppet's areola. Areola. I mean,
and it raises the question that, like, is someone who's watching Return of the Living Dead really going to jerk off to a dead corpse's tits when you had perfectly good ones 20 minutes earlier?
We're not just talking about perfectly good ones. We're talking about Trash's boobs. I mean, which is another thing we said was, who hasn't jerked off to
Linnea Quigley?
What's her name?
Yeah, we all had. Yeah. Everybody has.
So that's my plug. Is my band Ichabod Crane. I didn't even.
Any way to
I
find?
wish I had something horror related because that would have been less of a segue.
Ichabod Crane is horror related.
Yeah.
The name.
Just just Facebook it.
Ichabod. Facebook.com/Ichabod Crane Metal.
All right, Miguel, what do you got to plug, sir?
As always, I have the Monster Island Resort podcast, which you can find at monsterislandresort.org. The website I've just busted my ass for 2 days, completely overhauling the look of the site to make it easier to use. And I have a link at the top for this here Reddit Horror Club podcast.
And I appreciate that so much. In honor of this particular movie, instead of plugging Dollar Monday promotions, oops, I accidentally did. I wanted to plug a group of friends. A group of friends of mine are making a movie called Psych, and they're about to start production, but it's definitely a movie for fans of Behind the Mask. It's Psych with a 5 instead of an S. And you can check them out at Can the 5 Survive? It's the number 5 for that as well. But the concept is it takes place in 1984, and it's 5 people whose real-life tragedies have been turned into the 5 greatest slasher movies of all time. And
that's awesome.
And they're confronting their fears. And it's like the one guy was on a hockey team, and the hockey player took some bad LSD, or the goalie took some bad LSD and was like killing the team. And someone's like, "Oh my god, we should use the hockey mask for the next Jason movie." So their thing is, the 5 people's lives inspired Friday the 13th 3D, Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, and Sleepaway Camp. So the fact that, and they said Sleepaway Camp gets more focused than anything else, which makes me really happy because it's my favorite slasher movie.
Yeah, mine as well.
Yet? Has anybody picked that?
No one
Which
has
one?
picked that yet, but that's going to happen.
Okay. Anybody that is actually listening to the end of this podcast, pick Sleepaway Camp if you haven't picked the movie yet.
You're listening to the Geekscape Network.